Okay, welcome to the Enterprise Tomorrow conversation series. So today we have a renowned thinker, in my opinion, and someone who has seen the whole gamut of enterprise evolution, Peter Wood, with us. So I would request Peter to give a quick introduction on his background before we start get into the conversation. Peter.
Aaron, thanks for that great welcome. I'm not sure I can live up to your introduction of great thinker, but we'll let the audience judge. Very pleased to be joining you today. My background, so I'm founder director of a boutique consultancy called Partners in Change. We specialize in organizational transformation through people. So some of the more traditional disciplines of organization development and talent management alongside some of the waves of the new in terms of the impact of AI and machine learning and data analytics. But essentially it's that, very easy to say, hard to do, achieving sustainable business results through people. Personally, I've been based in Asia for nearly 20 years, most of that time in Singapore with some time in Hong Kong, some time in Australia. Earlier parts of my career, I was based in Africa. I've done work in Turkey, France, across Europe. And as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm actually from the UK originally, so I've done plenty of work there too. What kind of work? Well, my usual one-liner there is that I was the postgrad psychologist who went to business school. So I kind of work on both sides of that line. But my career has really been spent as a mixture between consulting with some of the big firms like Mercer and Willis Towers Watson, but also working in-house for large multinationals, organizations like Merck, Schneider Electric, MetLife, etc. So that's me.
Thank you, Peter. So that's a lot of experience behind you. So, Peter, there is a lot of chatter about enterprises of tomorrow and how they are going to be vastly and drastically different from what we see around now. So, if I may ask you, and it's a very open-ended question, a very short description of what you would envisage when you think about enterprise of tomorrow. How do they look like?
Okay. Yeah, I think as you're implying, an awful lot's been written about workforce of the future, and that's been going on, I think, on steroids with the pandemic. I think with all the commentary here, typically things become, extreme versions of everything gets people's attention. But I'm always in mind of a quotation, a maxim which said people tend to overestimate the impact of change, especially technology, in the short term, and underestimate in the long term. So, I think, assuming we do actually manage to get on top of COVID, I think we will have seen an acceleration of some of those trends for example, towards more distributed working, the so-called hybrid workforce. I think a greater embrace of or an evolution of the gig economy, where rather than being an employee or a contractor, now having seen that people can do work from anywhere with certain provisos, there are certain things that are lost in that process. There'll be a lot more flexibility as far as that's concerned. And I think although particularly employers have talked about this partnership between employer and employee for a long time, I think because there's much more of an equalization in terms of employers assessing employees and now employees assessing employers through giving feedback on platforms like Glassdoor, I think there'll be a much more mature relationship. It won't be about lifetime careers. It'll be about what can you offer me. On the other hand, the imperatives to deliver, and perhaps in a more challenging and dynamic environment, an environment requiring agility, will only increase. So I think it'll be a different kind of deal. I think the organizations will be more fluid, but in some ways they'll be more mature and fulfilling places to work.
Oh, thank you for that. And one of the central themes that I've been seeing, right, and we at Entomo have been seeing across client conversations, especially ones who have been able to evolve fast, has been about leveraging the role of purpose or making themselves a purpose-oriented, purpose-driven organization. Mm-hmm. And even a lot of credible research says that when an organization is more purpose-driven and employees are more purpose-oriented, the age-old issue of productivity and performance gets solved. So, question: is that true? And if it is true, what are some of the real life case studies or steps that you have seen where organizations have successfully done that?
I think this is a case of Back to the Future. I mean, right since the the time of our parents and maybe even grandparents, the 60s, people have always wanted to feel that that their labours are going towards something bigger and greater than just contributing to their paycheck. So I think that idealism has always been there. I mean, at the start of my consulting career back in the 90s, there was a lot of focus around vision and mission. And this was seen as being a differentiator for an organization. In fact, some organizations and consultancies toyed around with a concept that they called internal marketing. So this was, I guess, taking a much more what we'd regard as being an up-to-date view of internal comms and saying, well, we've got to reflect the values, the brand, the external brand that we direct towards customers internally to actually ensure that there's a seamless expression of those brand values when customers interact with us. And of course, that I think is what we're seeing now, enabled by technology. To use the jargon, the world of CX and EX, where the ability to get very frequent, if not real-time metrics on customer experience, employee experience, and we can track that. And as a leader, we can track that in our pocket. Has really emphasized the importance of having a powerful employer brand for employees. We're actually marketing to them as well. And one of the things we need to be able to offer is purpose. So rather than being something kind of fringe that we kind of tack on as a communications thing, this is now absolutely mainstream. And as was always the case, employees are very able to tell, whether this is kind of something that's just tacked on or whether it's actually core to the organization. I remember back in the noughties when I worked for Merck, the US pharma company. They had a long statement, I guess, which was their version of the Johnson & Johnson credo, which was credited back to Mr. Merck in the 1950s, which basically said, focus on the benefits of patients and health, and the profits will follow. And I think the acid test for any organization is, does that ring true with everybody in the organization with different levels of the organization? Or is there what is that? Or is there an eye roll? Most recently for me, I think my experience with Schneider Electric, an organization I worked with as an HR leader for many years. When I joined them in 2012, they were pioneers of the idea of energy efficiency in electrical transmission and control. It was all about sustainability and greenness and the rights to access to electricity. At the time, it's like, well, this is great, but really, is that the thing to be kind of focusing on? It was actually hugely insightful and ahead of its time. And it became very much a guiding principle for where the business invested, how it structured its products and services, subsequent acquisition of software around efficiency, lifetime energy usage, etc. That put them in exactly the right space for the development of the market and I think social consciousness generally. So, fast forward to the last few years where they've been going to undergrad engineers and postgrad business students or whatever, and they say, look, we're this kind of company. This is our purpose. Here's what we stand for. And there's absolutely no question. Everything the CEO says and does, everything the executive committee says and does, contrast that with an organization that comes up with something which sounds good, that's started by the HR and communications people. And I think people see through that very quickly, and they vote with their feet in today's world, where I think is a much more equal balance of it's coming towards an equal balance of the best talent being able to choose where it goes and voice its opinion. So yeah, I think that's actually extremely important. There is also the question you mentioned at the outset, that relationship between productivity and purpose. With a statistical point of view, one can always argue the other way, of course, which is are the companies that are most productive, are they able to spend more time and focus on purpose? I think there's probably a bit of backflow there, but I can tell you from my own experience working in and with different companies, the kind of culture and environment and levels of employee engagement in an organization with purpose are, with true purpose, are way above those of one that just pays it lip service.
That's very heartening to hear as well, right? Because an organization grounded on purpose and attracting good talent essentially means that those are the organizations which are going to be successful, right? Now, the question that comes to my mind when you talk about attracting the right talent by talking about purpose, and only in such a scenario will an organization be able to attract this talent. What happens once this talent comes into the organization? How do you ensure or empower that the every individual who join an organization is armed with the right information, is armed with the right inputs, so that she or he knows what exactly they need to do? So I'm bordering line about augmented analytics, that which has been there has been a lot of conversations about augmented analytics and moving away from centralized analytics, but augmenting action every day for every employee using analytics, that so that it helps organizations achieve their purpose, individuals achieve their goals. Now, where do you think the industry is today at in leveraging insights and analytics to help employees every day to achieve their peak performance?
Before I answer that, I'll just take like a half step back to where you segued into that. I think you kind of you touched a very important point there, which was that employee experience is about what employees experience every day. Sounds obvious, but it's not about being a candidate or coming into the organization. And the employer brand is not just the candidate brand or what people see from outside. It's what do they experience inside. So organizations who say this is the best place to actually build your career, and we're a very digital organization. You better be able to follow through on that. And sure, it's not something that the organization does to the individual. The individual has to be part of that kind of partnership. But I think being able to provide those experiences at every step of the employee journey, different kinds of employee experience, and those between joining and leaving will be around development. They'll be around feedback. I guess this is where it comes into answer your question. I think organizations are belatedly getting into analyzing the data they actually have. They've had for many years through their databases, the near ubiquitous HRIS for large organizations. The techniques for basic analysis of workforces have been there for decades. I think the ability to have metrics around individual development, around individual performance, maybe not just from manager, but maybe 180 or 360 in your pocket, it's useful. I think you've got to be very, very careful that the whole thing doesn't turn into some kind of badge earning game. And I think it's important not to let what technology can do run away with what it's desirable to do. I think analytics generally, when you move into the more advanced applications of machine learning, natural language processing, they allow things to be done that otherwise were either impossible on a labor-intensive basis. I can remember doing employee surveys of tens of thousands of people, and you basically had to read them, but you read 1 in 100, you do a random sample. Now with natural language processing, but again, it's only as good as the categories that people can actually give meaning to that actually come out of that kind of process. So I think it's very important that managers actually have insights and individuals have insights, but I think it's important that the technology and what can be done doesn't actually run away with, firstly taking up too much time and bandwidth, so the screen kind of hogs the attention, and people focus on the technology and not how do we want to create an environment here, how do we want to make sure we're taking the temperature from employees and from managers, giving managers insights in real time through processes such as continuous listening to highlight where things might be going wrong or where there are things going right in the employee sense that can be generalized to other parts of the organization.
Very interesting. And what particularly stood out was what you said about differentiating between what technology can do and what technology should be doing, right? So to me, that essentially is about keeping the people or keeping or human centricity at the core, while technology should be augmenting them to help them do what they need to be doing, right? So that's very interesting. Now, in the scope of the enterprise of tomorrow, which we are envisaging or all of us are together building, where do you think the role of role of an organization comes in talent development? It can sound like a mundane question, but there is a lot of recalibration that is being called for on whose responsibility is talent development, whose responsibility is career. Is it the responsibility of the talent, or is it the responsibility of the organization? And whomsoever responsibility it is, where does the technology come in? And that's
Yeah.
something which I've been very curious about.
Yeah, this is actually a fascinating area, and again, with a bit of an historical perspective, there's always been, these discussions in organizations. Employees have to own their careers. Fine, okay, but they can't develop themselves by themselves. So you provide some kind of learning resources. There'll be a learning and development function, but that's very much kind of dipping into, in the old days it was classroom sessions. Nowadays it's kind of on your phone in the moment. But it's still, even if it's what the current jargon is, in the flow of work, isn't it? So even if it's kind of, well, I need to know about how to do this in Excel now, it's kind of like micro level learning, or it's just introducing a new concept, such as there are platforms out there for introductory digital skills, which are actually very useful. But ultimately, development really happens through whole experiences on the job in the workplace. And that's where a manager, maybe not a direct manager, it could be a project manager, it could be some kind of coach. That's where it's absolutely critical, because those things kind of come in chunks. And I think a lot of technology has been kind of speeding up the old way of doing things, so we can develop these kind of drops of learning faster in a more accessible way, and we can give people a scorecard. And if we still maintain a competency model, we can relate that to where they are in terms of the level of competency, although it's a bit hard to assess outside of seeing actual behavior. I think what you're actually seeing now is a couple of more radical possibilities that are out there via technology. I worked with one when I was at Schneider. It wasn't actually my project, but I was part of the whole piloting and evaluation. This was creating an internal open talent market. Kind of simple in idea, but pretty seismic in terms of its implications. So I'll explain what it tried to do first of all. So imagine those machine learning assisted platforms that we all interact with, whether it's Amazon or Netflix. You may also like, buyers of this product also looked at, or dare I say, swiping left or swiping right on Tinder. It's reflecting what you've done before. So this was a platform that actually allowed managers to post jobs and projects. In other words, pieces of jobs, things which they wanted done or they thought might be good development opportunities, and then elements of development that an employee wanted, basically. So imagine you are in a finance department, you have ambitions to work in a business or sales area. If you just apply for a job, you don't have the experience, you wouldn't make it through the first cut. I'm talking about inside the organization. But if you can get to work on a project somewhere else where maybe they need finance skills in pricing a new product or assessing a new distribution channel, then they benefit from your skills, you benefit from the experience. And then next time someone looks at your CV, oh, okay, that's interesting. She worked on that kind of product launch. So in principle, a fairly simple kind of matching technology was used. This was with an external vendor. And I think another famous MNC was also like a co-pilot user alongside Schneider. But that was launched out in part of the organization and was actually pretty successful. Then along came COVID, and suddenly you can imagine, well, I don't think there was ever a hiring freeze there, but there were less opportunities to bring people inside the organization. So the idea of actually looking internally became hugely popular. It was interesting to see in some parts of the world, most of the usage was around projects. In other parts of the world, most of the usage was, whole jobs. So this is something you couldn't really do before. I mean, you could kind of do it informally by saying, this high potential talent needs development in this area. let me think about my network as an HR or talent development person. Oh yeah, there's somebody in the States who's doing it, but you can't do it on any kind of scale. So I think that was very interesting to see how that kind of takes off. Obviously, there are certain machine learning requirements. They need a certain number of people to participate. It's only as accurate as the cases that it can learn from in terms of matching. There are a few clever things such as downloading LinkedIn profiles. So people didn't have to enter all of their skills again, but they could add stuff to that. And it also used natural language processing to look at the job descriptions, the project descriptions being placed by managers. But then back to your original question, man. So imagine a situation where this works, it's wildly successful. Where does that leave talent managers and talent management and the high potential career planning and succession planning and so forth? In a way, it's disintermediated HR. Managers initially feeling, oh God, now I have to do this by myself, but suddenly, hey, I don't have to raise a requisition for something internally. I can see who's out there and I can hire them. But imagine you're the manager and someone in your team is pulled out like that. Then do you get a veto on that if they've been there for 6 months or a year or 18 months, or how does that work? So I think organizations are beginning to experiment with things like this, and I think the face of talent management is actually changing, and I would see that being a much more, again, that term hybrid, I suppose, part of it in terms of this natural kind of LinkedIn-like marketplace that's out there, but still with more managed careers. But I think it's going to get a lot more complicated for talent managers. But I think there's going to be a lot of this kind of managing the market and kind of shifting flows one way and another. And analytics is going to come back to say, okay, so what are the jobs, what are the skills I see being requested by managers? What are the skills and work experiences I see at a collective level being requested by employees? So huge possibilities, I think, for the talent management of the future, but some really big challenges just at a time when I think the existing ways of doing TM were beginning to kind of, gain traction and bed down. So I think we're going to see another one of those, jumps up in terms of evolution.
Thank you, Peter. So in the past few minutes, I have picked up 3 interesting traits of enterprise of tomorrow. One is that they will be heavily purpose-oriented at all levels. Second is they will be insight-driven and augmenting the intelligence or augmenting work of individuals and teams. And the third is that talent development will be a joint responsibility of the organization and the individual, which will be tech-enabled. So 3 very interesting traits of enterprise tomorrow in a very short chat with Peter. Now you all understand why I thought Peter is an intellectual from whom I can learn a lot. So Peter, thanks a lot for joining the conversation. So we'll continue this conversation as we evolve our own understanding and the ecosystem's understanding of what enterprises of tomorrow look like. And I'm very hopeful that will be much more smarter, much more productive, and much more useful for the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.